Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories, where heartfelt tales are shared with warmth and honesty. Today, I want to tell you something truly special. A story of first love, deep, pure, and seemingly lost to time, yet somehow destiny brought it back. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even years of silence, even miles apart, their name still echoes inside your chest like it never left? If you have, then you'll feel every word of this journey. It's about Linda and John, two hearts once intertwined, then torn apart, now standing face to face again. Not to repeat the past, but to rewrite the ending they always deserved. So take a breath, lean in close, and let the story begin. Linda Monroe grew up in the small cottage tucked behind the Wallace estate, where her mother worked as the head cook for one of the wealthiest families in the region. Though she came from humble beginnings, Linda carried within her a wild, curious heart that always looked beyond the white fences toward the open sky. John Wallace was the only son of the estate, a boy born into privilege, destined to inherit a legacy of vineyards and tradition. But what made John different wasn't his inheritance. It was his warmth, his imagination, and the way he saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. They first met under a blooming magnolia tree when they were 6. Linda was flipping through a worn-out book, and John sat beside her with a toy truck in hand, as if their souls had already known each other long before that day. Childhood drifted by in stolen afternoons picking berries, evenings stargazing on grassy hills, and secret promises whispered under tree canopies. They built a world of their own, free of class, free of judgment. As they grew older, their bond deepened. At 17, John took Linda's hand under a silver moon and confessed his love. The brush of his fingertips, the trembling kiss in the quiet kitchen when her mother wasn't home, it was love in its purest, most honest form. But they kept it hidden. Linda knew her place. She wasn't the kind of girl families like the Wallaces welcomed with open arms, and John, though defiant, was still bound by expectations etched in generations. Still, the secret glances in hallways, the scribbled notes tucked beneath pillows, the way their fingers would brush accidentally during chores, it was more than teenage infatuation. It was soul-deep connection. One night, Linda whispered to him, "If there's a place where we can be free, I believe our love would last forever." And John had smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll find that place. Because wherever you are, that's where I'm free." Their love had blossomed quietly, tenderly, in the shadows of the Wallace estate. No promises were needed, just presence. But the world outside, with its rules, its wealth, and its judgment, eventually crept in. One sweltering summer afternoon, Linda came home earlier than usual and found her mother packing in silence. Her hands trembled as she folded linens, face pale with worry. "We have to leave tonight," her mother said, voice dry and shaking. "Mr. Wallace found out about you and John." Linda froze, the words cut like glass. Her mother explained that one of the staff had seen her and John in the garden the night before. This morning, Mr. Wallace summoned her, fury in his eyes. "Leave quietly," he'd said coldly, "or I'll ruin both of you, and anyone who tries to help." Linda wanted to run to John, to explain, to beg him to come with her, but her mother stopped her. "You don't understand, Linda. If you go to him, he'll come after us harder. He'll hurt others too. The housekeeper with kids in school, the gardener whose wife is sick, it's not just about us anymore." That night, under a starless sky, Linda left the only place she'd ever known, the estate that had witnessed her childhood, her first love, and every sacred memory, now became a place she couldn't even say goodbye to. Meanwhile, John waited beneath the magnolia tree, just as they'd planned. He waited for hours, convinced she was simply late. But as the sky darkened and crickets sang in place of her laughter, the truth began to settle in. The next morning, the kitchen was silent, no soft footsteps, no humming, no Linda. He asked, but no one gave him answers. Servants dodged his questions, his mother feigned ignorance, his father was a wall. In the silence, he assumed the worst, that she'd left on her own, that what they'd had wasn't enough for her to stay. Years passed. but every time he walked past that magnolia tree, a part of him ached. And somewhere, miles away, in a city of strangers and noise, Linda carried a broken heart, filled with regret, pain, and one name she could never forget: John Wallace. 10 years had passed, but for Linda, each year had been a climb, one rung at a time, out of the shadows of her past. She studied, worked late hours, and eventually became a university lecturer in New York. But no matter how far she went, there was always a quiet emptiness she couldn't name. When she was invited to interview for the position of scholarship director at a nonprofit dedicated to educational outreach, she accepted without hesitation, until she learned that the main office was based in the very estate she once called both home and heartbreak, the Wallace estate. The moment her shoes touched the familiar gravel path, something in her chest shifted. The magnolia tree still stood, tall and watchful, its petals beginning to bloom again. The house hadn't changed much, but Linda had. Now she walked with confidence, in heels that echoed across the hallway, with a degree in one hand and a resume strong enough to stand on its own. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. A staff member led her down a hallway, one she used to sneak through as a girl, and stopped in front of a meeting room. "The program director will be with you shortly," the assistant smiled. Linda nodded politely, unaware of who she was about to see. The door opened, and there he was, John Wallace. Taller, broader, his hair a bit shorter, his eyes deeper. No longer a boy, but a man, and yet still unmistakably him. For a moment, the world fell away. No walls, no distance, just two souls stunned into stillness. "Linda," he breathed, as though speaking her name might make her disappear again. She straightened her spine, offering a small, composed smile. "Hello, John." The air between them was heavy, thick with things unsaid, with memories neither had truly buried. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, though neither of them looked comfortable. The formal interview proceeded, awkward and stilted, each question a poor disguise for stolen glances and lingering silence. When it was over, Linda walked to her car with trembling hands. "You're not that girl anymore," she told herself. "This is just work." But her heart whispered something else. This is him, the boy who once held your world in his hands. Back in the office, John stood by the window, watching her walk away again. But this time he made himself a promise. If fate was giving him a second chance, he wouldn't let her leave without the truth. After that strange, unfinished interview, Linda expected nothing. She thought she'd never step foot on the Wallace estate again. But a week later, an email arrived. She'd been offered the position of scholarship program director, personally recommended by John Wallace. Linda didn't know where to begin. Working with John, once the center of her entire world, felt like walking on ground both familiar and foreign. They started talking again, slowly, cautiously, like every word might step on the edge of an old scar. In the beginning, their meetings were stiff, filled with long silences and overly formal words. John was polite, distant. Linda was careful, deliberate. But as they began working more closely, planning scholarship outreach, visiting schools, speaking with students, something subtle started to shift. They weren't just co-workers. They were something else, something unspoken, quietly rebuilding. One afternoon, after visiting a pilot classroom together, John paused in the hallway. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Linda," he said, looking her directly in the eyes, "I never stopped looking for you." She froze. The hallway around them went quiet. "All these years," he continued, "I've gone to every place we ever dreamed of, asked old friends, hired people to search public records, but you were gone, like a ghost." Linda met his gaze. His eyes weren't the same as the boy she once loved. They were deeper now, weathered, but still carried that same unwavering softness. For her. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because you were never just a memory," he replied. "You were everything real to me." She said nothing more. But that night, alone in her apartment, Something in Linda's chest stirred. Slowly. Her heart, once quiet, once guarded, was starting to awaken, not in the wild rush of first love, but in something steadier, something quieter, a heartbeat that perhaps was finding its way back home. As days passed, something delicate but undeniable started to grow between Linda and John. Their conversations became warmer, their meetings longer, they laughed more, their glances lingered just a bit too long. Linda started to allow herself to dream, just a little, that maybe this time they'd finally have a real chance. But then she heard the rumor, a quiet conversation outside the HR office. Word is John Wallace is getting engaged, Harrington's daughter, big-time investor, strategic deal, all that. Linda froze. She didn't react, didn't ask, she just began pulling away, gently, quietly. Her emails became short and distant, their spontaneous chats faded. She still smiled, still showed up, but she didn't stay in the room long enough for him to reach her anymore. John noticed the shift instantly. At first, he thought she was just busy, but day by day, her distance grew, and with it, the cold grip of fear returned, the same fear that once crushed him when she disappeared without a word. That afternoon, as Linda gathered her things to leave, John stood in her doorway. "Come with me," he said, voice firm but trembling. "John, I really can't. Please." There was something in his eyes that stopped her. He didn't tell her where they were going, just drove in silence through back roads and winding turns until the car stopped. And Linda knew the place before she even stepped out. The magnolia tree, the one from their childhood, their secret haven, the place where everything began and silently ended. "I waited for you here," John said quietly. "All night. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I waited. I thought you'd come." Linda looked away, her chest tightening. "You want to know why I didn't?" she whispered, eyes fixed on the flower-covered ground. "You deserve to know." And for the first time in 10 years, Linda spoke the truth. "Your father, he forced us to leave. He called my mother into his office and threatened her. Said if I saw you again, he'd fire everyone connected to our family. People with children in school, parents with sick spouses. I wrote you a letter, John. I wanted to say goodbye. But my mother burned it. She said if you love him, you have to let him go." John stood frozen, every breath catching like a question unanswered. The soft petals fell around him, but none landed on his shoulders, as if even the tree couldn't bear to touch his pain. "I thought you knew," she said, voice cracking. "I thought you chose silence." So I stayed silent too. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of blossoms and old pain. John stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, no hesitation, no restraint. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know. Linda, I didn't know." She didn't resist. She let her tears fall against the shoulder of the man who had once shattered her heart and now was helping mend it. After a long silence, her voice trembled in his embrace. "And the engagement, John, is that true?" He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own rimmed with red. "No, absolutely not. That's something my family concocted. A quiet business arrangement. I never agreed to anything." He brushed a thumb gently against her cheek. "How could I, when my heart is still here, with you, beneath this tree?" Linda closed her eyes, letting the truth wash over her. Warmth, pain, and something fragile, like hope. And for the first time in 10 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time, they wouldn't lose each other again. After that afternoon beneath the magnolia tray, something between Linda and John had truly shifted. No more walls, no more unsaid words, just honesty, spoken and heard. They didn't rush. They walked beside each other, like old friends who had rediscovered a shared language after too long in silence. One step at a time, one conversation, one healing moment at a time. On a clear afternoon, with golden sunlight spilling gently through the leaves, John asked Linda to return with him to the magnolia tree, where everything had begun and nearly ended. "You know," he said as he held her hand, "I used to think just seeing you again would be enough, but I was wrong. I don't want to spend another second of my life without you in it." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know I'm 10 years late, but if you're still waiting, will you be my wife?" Linda was speechless. The breeze played with her hair, the sun casting soft light on her cheeks. Her eyes welled with tears, and she nodded. Slowly, firmly, "Yes," she whispered. "I've been waiting." The wedding came not long after. It was simple, warm, and filled with quiet joy. Held in the courtyard of the educational center they had helped build together, it was surrounded by students, staff, and even some of the old workers who had once filled the halls of the Wallace estate. Linda wore a soft, flowing white dress and carried a bouquet of magnolias, the flower that had grown beside their love since the beginning. John held her hand with a quiet certainty, no longer afraid of losing her. He was only focused on loving her, fully and freely. As they exchanged vows, the distant sound of church bells echoed softly, as though the universe itself was offering a late blessing. Their first love, a love once thought buried under years of silence and pain, had returned, not to repeat the past, but to be fully lived here and now. One time and forever. Life after the wedding wasn't grand or glamorous for Linda and John. It was simple, like their love, genuine, quiet, and full of little joys. They lived in a cozy house near the educational center, where mornings began with Linda watering the plants on the porch and John making coffee in the kitchen. They went to work hand in hand, continuing their mission to give young people what they themselves once longed for, a chance. One spring morning, as the magnolias began to bloom again, Linda stood in the bathroom, holding a pregnancy test in trembling hands. Tears welled up in her eyes. She walked outside to the garden, where John was tending a row of tiny flowers. "John," she called gently. He turned to her, catching the soft quiver in her voice and the sparkle in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby." He didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around her, holding her like it was the first time all over again. 9 months later, on a quiet morning filled with sunlight and calm, they welcomed their daughter Emma, a little girl with her mother's brown eyes and her father's gentle smile. Sometimes John would sit beneath the magnolia tree, reading softly to Emma while she napped on his chest, and Linda would watch them from the porch, her hand resting over her heart, the same heart that had once been broken, now whole again, mended by love, by forgiveness, and by the family they had built together. If Linda and John's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Noah's Stories for more tales of love, loss, and redemption. And remember, sometimes love finds its way back when we least expect it.